Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton. This episode brought to you by South Point Dodge. We'll talk more about them in a little bit. Gerry, Steve Sarkisian, it's a referendum, some believe, on his coaching tenure at Texas, despite having been to 2 national college football playoffs in the last 2 years. He has not been great to this point against elite teams. The Longhorns are 2-11 in his time period. Granted, his first 3 years on campus weren't exactly his, first 2 years for sure, weren't exactly a great team of his. But the last 2 years, he's basically 2-5 with wins over Alabama, as well as Arizona State last year in the Peach Bowl. But he's lost 2 in a row to Georgia. He's lost 2 to Washington. He's lost 2 to Ohio State. He's 2-11 overall. What are your thoughts? I mean, is this a must-win game for Steve Sarkisian to be considered among the nation's elite coaches?
Yeah, so I think it is. Now, there's more season after this game, to be clear. But, look, you start getting placed in tiers, whether you think it's fair or not, whether you agree with it or not. There's the guys that have won multiple national championships that are coaching. There's the guys who have won a national championship. They're the guys who have coached and gotten really close to that national championships, kind of that next tier down. And I think Sark is fighting right now to be in that tier with a Kalen DeBoer, who, whether it's guys set out in the first bowl game or not, Kalen DeBoer is 2-0 against Sark, and one of those is a national semifinal game. And Washington went on to play for the title. Texas did not. So you're kind of trying to get to those tiers. This thing's tiered out. I mean, obviously there's the Kirby here, and despite his fall, there's the Dabo here. Then there's Ryan Day. Marcus Freeman is rising in tiers right now. He played for a national championship last year, and he's a young coach in his career. So, yeah, these guys do get put in tiers, and it's the old "you are what your record says you are." Now, there's some caveats to that when you first take a job and you're building a program. But is it a must-win for Sark? I'll say this for Sark: if he wins this game at Georgia, it takes him to another level. If he doesn't win this game Saturday, then people are going to say, okay, is he going to get to that point of Marcus Freeman or Kalen DeBoer, who coached their team to a national championship game? So I do think it's a big game for Steve Sarkisian, though, because, it's going to be written, Bobby, if Texas loses. Well, you're 0-3 against Kirby in the last 2 years. Same time, you're 0-2 against Dale. And by the way, you're 0-2 against DeBoer, too. And 2 of those guys are in the SEC, and Ryan Day has the number 1 ranked program in the country. That's what's going to be written, fair or not. So it's a huge game for Sark.
And you got Mike Elko down the road in College Station doing pretty darn well right now. Gerry, I look at this game, and we've talked about some of the pieces to it. The Georgia linebackers got brought up by Sark again today. You've been mentioning them. Sark has been talking about how he just needs all 3 phases to be on their P's and Q's this weekend. A lot of different discussion points we can go in. The question I had you, and I talked to the coaches about this and mentioned it to them on lunch with the coach today, and wanted to ask you, is this a game where a Colin Simmons, an Anthony Hill, an Ethan Burke, where the Texas pass rush maybe makes things difficult for Gunnar Stockton and finally puts Georgia behind the chains? Alabama was able to do that, by the way. What are your thoughts? Is that the path potentially to victory for Texas?
One of the things I'm looking for early on Georgia passing downs in this game, does Georgia believe they have to chip help against Colin Simmons, or do they think a Georgia tackle is going to handle him one-on-one, or do they have that much confidence in their offensive line? I think that's what I'm looking for early while this game's kind of establishing itself. But the key for me with that question is you have to get Georgia in five man protections and where they feel like they have to get a lot of guys out in the pass route, right? And maybe running back the chip help in pass pro. When teams have done that, they've gotten decent pressure on Gunnar Stockton. I mean, it's the same as anything else, right? If you can get your 5 guys and you have a couple of elite pass rushers matched up against an offensive line, you're probably going to win in a couple of spots. Then the back's got to pick somebody up to help clean up a play or you get to the quarterback and you disrupt timing. So that's what I'm looking for. Can Texas, to your point, can Texas get them in enough 5-man protections with a running back chip help to where Texas pass rush can have an effect on the game? And that's all going to depend on if Texas stops the run early in the game. I do think if Texas can get to that point, Colin Simmons will win, Anthony Hill will win. I think Ethan Burke has a chance to win in this game. I really do. And Ethan Burke may be more in the NASCAR, but I'm not sure how effective NASCAR is against Georgia's run game because they might just run it on you anyways from time to time. But the key for me to watch early is, are they going to let Colin, Georgia, work one-on-one against an Ernest Green, or are they not? That's the question. If they give chip help to Colin out of the gate, that's going to be a lot of respect that Georgia's given Colin Simmons.
I think you bring up an interesting point, and the question I have here is, I just want to see Texas put them in those scenarios.
Yes.
That's the bigger piece to me. Is it going to be 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 1, and Gunnar Stockton's going to the line with he can dump it to a tight end on a bootleg or run it himself, or and that's what they did a lot of the second half of the SEC championship game, by the way.
Yeah.
Or are we going to see a scenario where Texas has them in 3rd and 10, and then they do have to make some of those adjustments, or they have to give a little bit on that side of the ball? I think that's going to be key for this, whether it's Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, Ethan Burke, Zeno Miazulu, Lance Jackson, whomever it may be, right? Trey Moore, another guy that can get after him, and it did get after him last year in the SEC championship game. We'll see what happens. We've got some other things we want to talk about on Talkin Ball today. Before we do that, I want to say thank you to our friends over at South Point Dodge. Texas football fans score an easy extra point this season when you get to the point at South Point Dodge. South Point Dodge has more than 600 vehicles in stock, including the all-new Ram 1500. Get the real deal today and drive away in an all-new Ram, proven to last. Plus, you can get employee incentive pricing. That's right. You pay what our employees pay. Now, that's a real deal. So score big today at South Point Dodge. Come see us off I-35 in South Austin or at South Point Dodge. Get to the point at South Point Dodge. Jerry, the next piece of this, I want to ask you about the Texas offense going up against the Georgia defense. Texas, the last time they played a defense as physical as Georgia was against Florida. Florida went with a 4-man rush and got there. Okay. It is Georgia's defensive front, their front four. Is Florida's better, or at least man for man, or is Georgia just as good, if not better, in your opinion? So, and I know we hadn't made the change at left guard at that time, and center, but I felt like Florida's interior, they had some older guys that are going to be high draft picks. What is your take on that? Is this Georgia front as good or better than Florida's front?
The scary thing about the Florida front is Caleb Banks didn't even play, and he was their best guy in that game. So that's like always the thing you look back on, you're like, wow, he didn't even play in that game, and he's a projected 1st or 2nd rounder. Look, I think Christian Miller is on par with anybody Florida's got, but I think he's a run defender first and second and a pass rusher last. That doesn't mean he can't win some one-on-ones, but that's not what's going to make him the money in the draft right now. It's going to be his run-stopping ability. They're not as good up front as they were last year. They don't have Michael Williams out there. Now, their linebackers, Q Johnson playing on the edge wearing 33. He is 6'4", 250, and all of it, man. And then they have a guy that comes in on the opposite side or plays behind that's 6'4", 260, and he's all of it too. So I think they have more athletic edge, pass rush, potential because of the linebackers than Florida does, but Florida had bigger bodies to overpower you. Tyreek Sapp at edge, Florida at a big edge. Georgia doesn't have that. Their pass rush is more about the linebackers, and I mean they're going to be bringing double-A gap barrel blitzes. You know all of this is coming, so I think the Georgia defensive line's job is to hold a lot of times the point and let the backers come behind them and play the games and get to the quarterback. I think everything is set up for the linebackers on this defense.
You've mentioned a couple of times you think that the Georgia secondary, and the numbers show it, may be more susceptible than other aspects of their defense. Why do you think that is? The lack of a pass rush they've generated, or their defensive run game is so good? I mean, this happened to Texas a couple of years ago. Texas was so good at run defense, teams just abandoned the run and went pass for 60 minutes, right? Is that a little bit of what happens with Georgia, in your opinion, that they're so good against the run, people just say, hey, the only way we're going to move it is through the air?
Yeah, I think that's some of it. I think Georgia not being able to just rush the passer all out like they have been in the past is part of it too. I'm not sure they're as and look, they have really good athletes back there. I might be totally off. I'm not sure they're as ultra uber athletic with depth in the secondary as they were 21, 22, 23. I mean, KJ Bolden's a really good player, but Malachi Starks was an All-American with experience last year when Texas played him. KJ Bolden's a first-year starter that played a lot last year. Their corners, Dalen Everett, really good player. Does he have the out-and-out speed of a kid from back in the day like Tyson Campbell? No. Is Ellis Robinson's a long limb kid, has a couple of interceptions. Is he a guy that can just turn and run like the wind if you get behind him? I'm not sure they have those guys, right? I think they're aggressive, and I do think they take some chances. But I think I've seen teams get behind them. Now, Georgia was not going to let Mississippi State get behind them. So that's one thing. And that'll be interesting to see how they play Texas. They played some off coverage at times against Mississippi State because Brennan Thompson has real football speed with pads on. So does Georgia fear Texas like that? We'll see. But I think Emmett Mosley's physicality, his ability to go win 50-50 balls. I think DeAndre Moore is a route runner. I think those guys can win against Georgia if Arch has time, and there's even the threat of a run game to keep the linebackers from getting good depth.
Yeah, I look at it and I wonder, what worked against Vanderbilt and if it works against Georgia. One thing I just don't see working is the passes to the flat.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia horizontally, you try to beat them to the edge. They've got as much speed as anybody in the country overall, especially defensively. So you think that's going to be negated or at least mitigated from a success standpoint. I think Texas has to pass protect for Arch Manning. I think that's ultimately what's going to determine whether or not Texas can move the ball. Hopefully we see Texas establish some level of a run game. Nobody expects Texas to run for 150 yards in this game, but if they can get some sort of run game going, some semblance with CJ Baxter up the middle and Trey Wisner on the stretch play, etc., outside zone. Those things are possible for Texas. You just need pieces of it to work, right?
Yeah, Sark's not going to ever do what Iowa does, but what Iowa did is they ran it for 2 yards and clapped and said, all right, let's go to second. I mean, there has to be a willingness to do that, right? I mean, last year's games were the two games combined, I think there was 58 rushes or 55, 56 rushes for 60 yards. And that's a lot of sack yardages because Georgia had 13 sacks in 2 games. So that's not a real rush yards. Texas ran it a little better than that. But they have to just be willing to say, all right, good. Ooh, we got 2 yards on first down. Yeah, it's a willingness to just take 1 and 2 and 3 yard gains over the course of the game. Because the last thing I think Texas wants to have done to them in this game is Georgia runs the ball well. Then the clock starts eating. Then you get on your heels, and Gunnar Stockton's been too accurate. So you have to be able to keep your defense off the field, keep Georgia from going downhill on you and getting kind of in that feel with that crowd behind them and that really physical brand of football. So Texas has to be willing to get a 2 yard gain. And Sark says, all right, man, what are we calling on second and 8, AJ? Let's talk about this. I think that's where Texas has to go with this game. And every run's not going to be 2 yards, but you have to be willing to say, okay, if we have 13 2 yard runs in this game, we're okay with that. Let's make a little bit after 13.
As long as it's not -2.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the big issue. If it starts being -2, then you abandon the run game really quickly, unfortunately. Hey, Jerry, X factors for this game, in your opinion? My opinion is right now, Gunnar Stockton may be that for Georgia. He's completing right at 70% of his passes. Had a wonderful game against Mississippi State. He's really protecting the ball well. I think he has 2 interceptions all season long. I did not expect this from him preseason, but here we are and he's playing as well as any quarterback in the league right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think he gives them, and I'm not comparing him as a player. I've said this before. He feels like a little bit, he's a different player than what Colt McCoy brought to Texas, just from the, man, that guy's built to be in a Texas uniform. You listen to him talk, and you listen to him talk about Texas. Gunnar Stockton's kind of the same way about Georgia, right? There's some similarities there. Not talk about as a player, Texas fans, as accomplished of a player. But Gunnar Stockton's off to a really good start, and it has that feel about him. My key's Jack injuries. I think the tight ends against the Georgia linebackers are big. Nothing will get Dan Schumann and Kirby to look at each other more than if the tight end starts beating the linebackers, and that kind of messes with them a little bit. I think Jack injuries. I think, look, it's going to Emmett Mosley. You got to put it up and give him a chance to win 50-50 balls in this game. It's going to have to be some players making contested catches, I think, for me, unless there's busted coverages. On the flip side, on the Texas defense, I feel like Bobby Leonga-Lafau and Ty Anthony Smith have to play really physical and have to play the run really well in this game. They got to make the right fits. They got to make the right reads. They got to make the right contact. Because Georgia's going to try to challenge Texas and say, all right, here it is, mano-a-mano football. What are y'all going to do with it? So I think the Texas linebackers have that big game against the Ravens.
It makes sense. I mean, everybody's worried about the Georgia run game, and rightfully so. They run it right at 60% of the time.
Yeah.
And they're effective, highly, highly effective running team.
Bobby, think about the Georgia team we saw last year. They threw it 513 times and only ran it 429 times. That's not what Kirby built his program on. This year's more what and I think that's helped Gunnar Stockton year one as a starter.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're running it 60 times and throwing it 40. They flipped the script. I think it's obvious in the offseason, Kirby and his college roommate Bobo sat down and said, that wasn't Georgia football. We can't do that ever again. If we're going to win this thing and be what we are, we have to flip that script. We have to be able to run the football on people and then throw off of it.
I want to say this. When you go and watch Georgia on Saturday, watch their offensive line. They are big humans personified.
Yes.
And Texas recruited, I think, all but one of them.
They did. They offered them
all except the center, who happens to be the offensive coordinator at Georgia's son.
Yes.
Mike Bobo's son. And so Texas recruited all of those guys. That's one of them, Ernest Green, left tackle, came down to Texas and Georgia as well. And then the right guard and right tackle, both freshmen, Texas offered last year. Look, they're ginormous. Stopping the run is part one. Part two is putting them in bad situations on offense. And then part three is giving Arch enough time to throw the football. And we'll see.
Hey, Bobby, to you, I mean, you watched Mississippi State game too. I think what'll be interesting is Georgia hit Mississippi State with Nate Frazier's speed a lot in that game. And they were pulling both guards. It was very interesting. Right guard, left guard to pull, right guard to pull. And they hit on the outside with Frazier. I'll be a little surprised if Georgia doesn't say, here's our guy Chauncey Bowens, go tackle him for a while.
Yeah, they will. I mean, and Frazier didn't really cause much issue with Mississippi State until the second half of that game. It was Bowens that, I mean, he runs like a pinball.
Yes.
And I mean that in the nicest way possible. You can't really get at his legs. And so he just kind of like bounces off of people and goes forward for an extra 5 yards. I mean, he's a really talented running back. Texas is going to have to gang tackle him. There's just no two ways about it, because he will break tackles. He'll break tackles in the open field. He'll break them in confined spaces. He's just that kind of really talented running back. Frazier is more their speed guy.
Yeah.
I don't think, like, he will break one maybe against Texas if they misfit a gap.
Yeah.
But he's not the guy that you're sitting there going, oh boy, Bowens is the one you're just like, he's a little different. So we'll see how it all turns out. We got 5 more days to talk about it. We're going to be doing that here on Texas Football later tonight. Rod Babers, CJ Vogel, and Coach Bob Shipley join us for a live stream. Again, this episode of Talkin Ball brought to you by our friends over at South Point Dodge. Check them out down there in South Austin. Again, southpointdodge.com. More than 600 vehicles in stock and they have employee incentive pricing. For Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. This has been this episode of On Texas Football. Hook 'em horns.